Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you.
All right, so you say that President Trump is unfit to take the presidency. Why is that?
I would say that one of the most important values that we have as Americans is our form of government and things like respecting the peaceful transfer of power. I think that being able to concede when you've lost an election is really important. So I would argue that the events that took place leading up to and on January 6th are in and of themselves, among a whole bunch of other actions, immediately disqualifying for the office of presidency.
Okay, so Steve, let's talk about January 6th. What happened that day in your mind, and why does that disqualify President Trump?
I think that Donald Trump was unwilling to accept the results of the elections. I think that he fabricated slates of electors in order to have his vice president pick him to be the winner in the Capitol building on January 6th, even though he didn't have the votes or the evidence to support it. I think that is a wholly undemocratic thing. I think that it is destructive and undermines our democratic process of governance.
Do you attribute the violence on January 6th to Trump?
Largely, yes.
Okay, why?
I think that Donald Trump had been stoking the flames a year before the election, saying that the election was going to be rigged. I think that Donald Trump stoked all of these claims basically with no evidence, and then I think that he continued to stoke the flames while fabricating them, that the election had been stolen, that there was voter fraud, and then he invited people on the day of the certification, telling them that their election had been stolen, their country was being taken from them, they needed to fight like hell, that they were going to lose everything. He knew what he was inviting them there for, he knew what he was asking them to do, he knew, yeah.
He also told them to go down to the Capitol peacefully and patriotically, right? What time did protesters first go into the Capitol? What time did they first enter the Capitol?
I think it was around 10 a.m., I think is when the Capitol grounds were breached.
No, 2:11 p.m.
No, to be clear, that's not true.
2:11 p.m. is when protesters first entered the United States Capitol.
There's the grounds that were secured outside, though.
Okay.
Those grounds were breached while Trump was still giving his speech at the Ellipse.
Okay, let's talk about the entrance of the Capitol, because that would be more severe in your mind than simply walking onto the property, right? Can you concede that point?
Probably not. I think they were all really bad, but... Yeah.
Okay, well, entering the Capitol, let's just mark that point. 2:11, what should Trump have done at that point?
As soon as the Capitol grounds themselves were breached, he probably should have put out a statement on social media telling people that they needed to go home instead of telling them that Pence had failed them and basically encouraging the violence to continue.
So what if I told you at 2:38 p.m. President Trump tweeted, "Stay peaceful"? He tweeted that to his supporters, "Stay peaceful."
He tweeted
27 minutes later.
He tweeted that after Ashley Babbitt, I believe, had already been shot and killed.
Okay,
so what does it mean when you tell your people to stay peaceful? They're not being peaceful. That doesn't make any sense, right?
2:38 p.m., 27 minutes after the Capitol protesters had entered, he said, "Stay peaceful." Okay, at 3:13, he said, "Law and order." At 4:17, he posted a video saying, "Go home now." So what on earth was he supposed to have done? I'm not happy about some of the violence that we saw on January 6th, but let's put it in context.
Well,
Steve,
wait, you just said it. You just said what he should have done. The tweet that he did at 4:17.
No, that was a video. That was the third call.
It was it was the first time that he told them to go home.
Stay peaceful. 27 minutes after the Capitol protested entered the Capitol.
After Ashley Babbitt had already been shot and killed, they weren't being peaceful. Why are we saying stay peaceful? At this point, Pence had already been.
How many
doesn't matter. This is a red herring.
How many?
Hold on. Do you acknowledge that people broke into the Capitol?
What do you mean by break into the Capitol?
As in smashed. They entered it illegally. They
100,000 people were there that day. How many were charged with crimes? 100,000 people there. How many charged with crimes?
Do you acknowledge that people
How
broke
many were
into the
charged
Capitol?
with crimes then?
How many people in the BLM riots were charged with crimes? This is a red herring.
No, it's
How
not.
many people who...
You said they're violent. How many were there that day? 100,000. How many were charged with crimes? It's the largest FBI investigation in history. 1,553
It's not relevant at all.
Have been charged with crimes. How can you say they were all violent?
It's not relevant.
How can you say they were all violent?
The first people that got into the Capitol, did they break in?
Is January 6th your only reason why he's unfit?
Wait. Did the first people into the Capitol break in?
Is January 6th the only reason he's unfit?
Are you unwilling to answer that question?
Is January 6th the only reason?
Are you unwilling to answer? You can say yes, you don't want to answer it, and then move on because you know the implications are terrible for you. That's fine if you want to.
The reality of the situation is...
The reality of the situation is people broke into the
Capitol.
What is the number one voter
for voters?
They delayed the certification of the vote.
What is the number one issue for voters?
They delayed the certification of the vote. Did they not? It doesn't...
The vote was certified? Was it not certified?
Was there a delay in the certification? Was there a delay in the certification? It was because the National Guard showed up and they kicked the people out after Donald Trump was forced to tell them they were going home after watching them break in for 3 hours and do nothing. By your own admission,
let's have a productive conversation.
No, we're not having a productive one because you're not answering any of my questions.
Keep going. Okay.
Yeah, I asked you a very simple question. The first person that got into the Capitol who wasn't allowed in, how did he get in?
They walked into the Capitol.
No, they broke in with a riot shield that he's stolen from an officer.
Okay, and that makes President Trump unfit for office.
Do you acknowledge that happened? Are we living in the same reality right now? Do you acknowledge that happened?
There was violence on January 6th. I acknowledge that. There was 100,000 protesters.
I'm making a specific claim?
1,500.
Do you know what 1 + 1 is?
I do.
What is 1 + 1?
I think it's 2.
Okay, good. Okay, we can answer a question.
Math is racist. Math is racist,
The first person that got into the Capitol building, how did they get in?
You were arguing that Trump is unfit.
Hey, let's try this. Do you know what 2 + 2 is? Four. Who was the
think-
first person into the Capitol building? How did he get in? Why not just
Listen,
say he broke in?
Is your entire argument about January 6th yes or no?
Well, my biggest argument right now is that conservatives are delusional and they don't exist in the same reality that we
Why
do.
must
So
you
any other
attack?
conversation.
Why must you attack
Pause.
75 million voters?
Pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad we agree that there's a problem with the asylum system. And I actually,
Well, we don't agree. I think that, but
well, I'm agreeing with you that there's a problem with the asylum system.
Okay.
I actually think you care. I've been following you for a while. I actually think you deeply care about this issue and how it's affecting the American people. I do believe that sincerely. What is for the tens of millions of folks who are going to watch this video, just what is asylum as a process represent to you? What does it mean to qualify legitimately for asylum?
to legitimately qualify for asylum,
Yeah.
there's like official characteristics for it, but basically the place that you're fleeing, you're being persecuted for some characteristic or trait that we think that you obviously shouldn't be persecuted for, and you're facing like severe threats to your existence. And so you have to flee the country, and then you're basically coming to the United States saying like, I'm basically stateless, I can't go back to my home, like me and my family's at risk, and can you, basically take me in and me become a citizen that way, basically.
That's exactly right. You're fleeing racial, religious, ethnic persecution. Absolutely. Poverty wouldn't count as asylum. It's a fact. Poverty doesn't count. You have to be fleeing a particular type of persecution. If poverty is a coincident factor there, but the persecution is key.
Sure, I'm gonna hesitantly agree with you, but like let's say you're facing poverty in like Syria, where it's like a collapsed state, then it's like I can see that being different. But in general, yeah, if you're just poor, you probably shouldn't be able to come here and seek asylum for that. I
Absolutely.
agree with that.
And so that's why 90% of asylum claims are rejected. Let's talk about Remain in Mexico. You brought up that you think it was a failure, it seems.
Yes.
Why is that?
One, I think there were a lot of lawsuits in the United States that were starting to look promising, I think, in terms of overturning it. I think the ACLU had gotten a victory in the 11th Circuit or the 9th Circuit. And then also because just the number of people that were being kept out from Remain in Mexico, I want to say the total number over, I think it was like 3 years, was like 30 or 40,000. It wasn't that many altogether.
But isn't that actually a sign of its success because it was a successful deterrent? Think about it this way, Stephen. If you got people who are fleeing religious persecution and you got folks who are fleeing poverty, the people who are actually fleeing persecution, they will happily go to Mexico and wait for 6 months for their case to be heard.
I don't know if that's always the case.
Well, but
if you're fleeing and you literally have nothing, you're like a destitute family. Now you're sitting on like a border town, like waiting months and months, maybe for your.
But that's
asylum
better than
process.
religious persecution in Syria, right? I mean,
It might be, but ideally in the United States, we could process you almost immediately. And if you have a legitimate claim, we could house you here.
absolutely. But how do we keep the fraud out of the system? I thought Remain in Mexico, wherever you are politically, was a good way to do that. The idea was that if you're actually fleeing persecution in Syria or in East Asia or in Africa, you would be 99% better off in that camp in Mexico where it is protected, where you have food, where you have humanitarian resources. That keeps the fraud claims out. And so to this bipartisan border bill, well, first and foremost, 9 Democrats, including Elizabeth Warren, actually voted against it. So Donald Trump didn't kill it. Donald Trump was opposed to it for the same reasons that many Republicans and some
Hold on,
Democrats
to be clear, would that
were
bill have
opposed to it.
passed? Would that bill have passed without Donald Trump telling Republicans not to vote for it?
No, it would not have.
Okay, that's completely and totally incorrect. Okay,
What's
we
your
can
proof
look
of that?
up.
Well, listen, let's just talk about the substance of it.
Well,
Let's
the proof is that like it would have passed. People like McConnell, people like Cruz are literally saying like we're not voting on this bill because Donald Trump has told us to pull the plug on it. But the idea was that it was going to pass.
So what would that bill have done to deter the fraudulent asylum claims that are keeping out legitimate folks who are fleeing persecution?
Well, I think that right now the biggest there's an amalgamation of laws that make it so that because the asylum system is so backed up, I know that if I go to the United States, even if my claim is total bullshit, I can run to a port, claim that I'm an asylum seeker, and I know that they can't process me right now, so I get a slip saying, okay, we'll come back to court in a year or two, and it's like I'm in, and you're done. At that point, you just disappear, right? But if they could process you almost immediately, you show up and you're like, hey, I'm a asylum seeker. It's like, oh, cool, we'll come talk to the judge. You're like, okay, well, fuck me. Then the motivation to come in and try to get in fraudulently that way, I think dramatically decreases. And one of the big things that the bill helped with was providing a lot more judges that would be allocated for these things and a lot more funding for it, et cetera.
So just to correct that point,
Yeah.
there weren't actually judges. They were funding custom officers who don't have law degrees, who are biased one way, who are more likely to approve asylum claims that might end up proving fraudulent. I think
Wait, hold on. Who processes the asylum claims? If eventually you have to sit in front of a judge. my
No.
understanding.
And just clearly here, customs officers under the bipartisan border bill would be then given authority to process these claims. They don't have law degrees. They aren't judges. Judges typically kick these cases, but in this particular bill by Langford, it would actually be customs officers taking
Customs
over
officers
this.
would make the final decision on whether or not a person
Yes.
gets into the
and that's how you
country?
build up capacity, because you couldn't hire more immigration judges. There aren't enough people in the country to take those
I think you
judges.
can. I think the issue is that the judge number has been capped since I think the 80s or the 60s in terms of how many judges are allowed to hear these claims. So we haven't had more funding that was allocated
Why
towards
not
actually.
bring back Remain in Mexico. It absolutely works, Stephen.
Because I don't think it necessarily works, number one, because not that many people were kept out. And number two, even as a matter of policy, I don't know if the idea to the country to the south, he was like, hey, listen, there's not people coming to asylum, we're going to go ahead and store them in your country while we wait and process it.
Yeah.
I don't know how even Mexico would feel about that. I don't know if the conditions would necessarily be safe for those people either. Because I thought that one of the claims that I heard so much from the Trumples was how unsafe all of these like border towns had become because of so many people building up there. So why would you want to stick a legitimate asylum seeker there and keep them there? Would you agree that if somebody was coming here to legitimately seek asylum, and it was a legitimate case, that it would probably be good to take them in and house them immediately?
In an ideal world, absolutely. But we need to also separate those who are abusing the system. Again, 90% of those claims are fraudulent. But
So then shouldn't we increase the funding to process those claims as quickly as possible?
I think the deterrent is better in Mexico. But Stephen, let's agree to disagree, okay?
Okay.
Awesome.
Great.
Jesus.
Now, Stephen, that was very inflationary. Okay, that was very high.
Well, hold on. To be clear, I'm not a huge fan of just like stimulus stuff because I think it has a lot of inflationary pressures.
Sure.
I think forgiving student loan debt, I think would also be massively inflationary in a lot of bad ways. But none of those even come close to the total economic destruction that would be wrought on this country with across the board universal tariffs to every country in the world.
Were you concerned by the tariffs in the first term?
Yes.
Okay. Why didn't we see the inflation in the first term under Trump under these tariffs that you're so concerned about?
Because I think that raising prices and everything can kind of be masked through the allocation of money to other assets, especially when the economy is growing. So the world economy is growing, right? Because a lot of people can buy things, a lot of money can transfer to a lot of different places. Inflation has to do with dollars chasing supplies of goods, basically. And if the supplies continue to grow at a really high rate, you can probably afford more deficit spending. But the issue is that I don't think that Donald Trump was intelligently saying like, well, I can probably afford a deficit spend here because of the economy. I think he just likes to spend because everybody does. And I don't think that Trump would have the ability to rein it in, as he said multiple times in his Bloomberg interview yesterday. But also like the big event that was contributing to inflation over the Biden administration was probably COVID and a lot of the knock-on stuff from COVID.
American Rescue Plan, for example, the unemployment rate had already been cut in half. 100 million people had immunity to the virus, and yet we put $2 trillion of heroin into the economy.
The United States is also outperforming every single other G7 OECD country when it comes to metrics like inflation and how our economy is doing as well. So I think we probably made the right choice there, right?
Well, Stephen,
wait, would you say that we made the right choice where with like the American?
I disagree. I disagree.
Okay. So which country should we have acted like?
Well, I'm going to hold ourselves to the American standard, which is to always do the best thing and not to compare ourselves to others.
Okay,
Listen,
so we are outperforming everybody else, but you think we should be doing even better. Okay.
Stephen, if I'm the best alcoholic in the room, I'm in the wrong room. I don't want to be the best of the worst. I want to be the best compared to my own standard.
Okay, but to be clear, you're talking about a world where every single person is apparently an alcoholic.
Stephen.
I'm just saying that you're trying to point to an economic policy you can't point to in any other country in the world. And we measure things
8.5 million Americans
relational to other countries, and the fact that we did
I haven't
better than every single other
I haven't interrupted you.
good.
With all respect, I haven't interrupted you.
Okay.
8.5 million people are working multiple jobs to keep up with inflation. You've got 7 million prime working age men who are not in the labor force. 37% of Americans say that their children's life will not be better than theirs. This economy is hurting a lot of people right now. Do you accept that?
No. What's Donald Trump going to do to improve that economy?
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Let's just talk about that for a moment with all sincerity.
Sure.
What problem does tariffs try to address, Stephen?
In Donald Trump's world, or what? That's a very general question.
Objective speaking, when you look at tariffs, what does it try to solve for?
Tariffs can be levied for a variety of different reasons. The two most common reasons that are given is that one, it can be foolishly employed to try to protect an industry. So you would tariff other people to make your own industries more competitive. These require across-the-board tariffs, so not specific ones. And then a second reason could be for issues relating to, say, like national security. So for instance, I want to tariff these people's abilities to manufacture microchips or steel, not because I think we'll be economically better off, but because if we get into war with them, I don't want to be relying on them for process.
I think the latter case makes a lot of sense, by the way. If you get to war with China, now listen.
Although I would be honest about the latter one and say we don't do it for economic reasons, we do it for security reasons.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. And I agree with you on that. Does China have tariffs on us? Yes. Does Europe have tariffs on us? Yes. It's not free trade when they're rigging it against us and charging us to send our products over there. So the question is, Stephen, if they're putting tariffs on us, hurting our workers, hollowing out places from Middletown, Ohio to parts of Appalachia, why can't we put in place a deterrent that says, look, if you're going to rig the system against American workers, we are going to level the playing field. We got a real problem in this country, by the way.
If this was, hold on, real quick.
Stephen, I want to just, Stephen.
You asked me a question. Whatever economic plan or wherever you're talking about using tariffs, Sure, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Whatever you're saying, that was nothing to do with the Trump administration. What you're saying is you're talking about getting into a tariff war to try to bring tariffs down or to force somebody to engage in negotiations to bring tariff down in order to re-enter trade agreements, kind of like when Donald Trump renegotiated NAFTA into the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement, right?
And
but
you know
however,
Stephen,
you can't just say
Stephen,
Donald Trump doesn't say
the threat of tariffs
that's great,
to bring them
but
to the
Donald
negotiating
Trump is
table.
not talking about using tariffs to get more people to negotiate. He wants to create an autarky. That's his goal. Do you acknowledge that Donald Trump wants us to manufacture everything at home? That's all of his rhetoric. Do you acknowledge? He doesn't say it. Okay.
No, Stephen, just one second.
Yeah.
He wants us to employ the working men and women of this country to give them a fair shot.
Our unemployment
we're losing
is already
100,000
less than
people to
5%.
opioids every year. We're losing 900 people.
We're already below. We're already below
Stephen,
what the employment should be. We're already below 5%.
Stephen, 7 million working age men are not in the labor force.
That's a great number. I don't know what that number. Hold on. Do you acknowledge that?
Hold on. Stephen,
what?
Stephen, just one sec. Half of working age men who are not in the labor force are taking opioid painkillers every day. The broken industrial policies of this country.
And you think having
from
them
George
manufacture
Bush
shoes that
to
aren't
Bill
being made
Clinton,
in China is going to magically get rid of that problem?
No, Stephen.
This has
no.
anything to do
Does
with
New Balance
anything.
make in America? Yes or no?
None of this
Does
has to
New
do with
Balance make in
anything.
America?
I don't know. For the finally assembly,
Yes, they
maybe?
do.
Okay.
Yes, they do. But here's the thing, Stephen.
What was the point of that?
Stephen.
Do you think that we can manufacture every single good we
No,
consume
I
at
don't
home?
think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
What is the goal of 1,000 or 500 or whatever, 100%?
Where are Teslas made? Where are Teslas made? Where's the best-selling car in America made? In the world, rather. Where's it made?
I don't. When you say
right
where
here
is
in
it made-
America.
Hold on.
Right
What do you
here in
mean by that?
America.
Every single part?
No, the final assembly, a large.
Do you understand that yesterday
portion.
when Donald Trump was doing his interview with Bloomberg, he made fun of that. Donald Trump shit on companies like Tesla when he said, we do the final assembly here, we could have children do that. It's just throwing together Legos. Donald Trump doesn't like final assembly. Donald Trump wants not just the Tesla final assembly here, but all the batteries, all of the steel, every single component of that made in America. Again, your plan sounds great. That sounds like an ordinary, like decent economic plan. Donald Trump's plan is autarky. It's ridiculous.
I'm glad you like my plan. Thanks.
Okay, if you run for president, I'll support it.
I appreciate it. Okay. You're not voting for Trump.
No.
I am. I think we can have a respectful policy disagreement without labeling one side or the other fascist or communist or Marxist. So let's have a policy disagreement here. You think Donald Trump is a fascist because of ultranationalist tendencies and authoritarianism, correct?
Yeah.
So let me just draft this vision and see if it makes sense. The authoritarianism is ruling by presidential decree, prosecuting political opponents, bringing power into the government, and abandoning our allies abroad. That sounds a lot like the Biden-Harris administration.
So
look at
I would say that, no, wait, we'll go point by point.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
first of all, when we talk about abandoning allies abroad, are
Israel.
we referring to, so we haven't cut funding from Israel. Are we referring to when Donald Trump abandoned the Turkish people, or abandoned the Kurdish people to Turkish attacks in Syria? Are we talking about when the Trump administration cut out the Afghanistan government in the Doha Accords when they were talking with the Taliban, when Donald Trump surrendered to the Taliban? Or are we talking about when Biden tried to support Ukraine with the full force of not only the United States economy and our moral support, but also by getting Europe on board to help Ukraine? The idea that the Biden and Harris administration have abandoned our foreign partners is nonsense to me. And also, it's not just about making the government more powerful. I know that Andrew tried to run with that. It's about centralizing power within the government.
Right, and wiping off student loan debts at the expense of working class Americans. I understand that, but let's
So hold on. Wiping out student loan government, the citation for that was was a bill that was passed from Congress. Biden tried to do that because of it was like extraordinary times you could do something, and he tried to stretch it to that.
Supreme Court
but the
found
Supreme Court said no,
unconstitutional.
and then he didn't do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
but Supreme Court had to intervene, right?
Well, the Supreme Court made a ruling on it because it was challenged. That's the government like working as a tenant.
And he stopped trying to do that right afterward, right? He said, I'm not going to do this anymore, or did he say, I'm going to keep delivering on this promise?
I think he explored other legal avenues to do it.
Okay, well, legal remains to be seen, but let's talk about...
Well, he hasn't done anything illegal, right?
Okay, let's talk about...
Well, he hasn't done anything illegal, right?
We're talking about...
Okay, there's no answer to that. Okay.
Let's talk about October 7th. October 7th would not have happened if President Trump was in office. Ukraine would not have been invaded by Russia if President Trump was in office. You can call him crazy, you can call him anything. He was an effective deterrent because he understood, Stephen, a little thing we like to call peace through strength. Here's the truth.
The truth is October 7th probably happened likely because of Trump and his policies.
Well, holy moly, why is that?
Why is that?
Yes, please.
The reason why is because Donald Trump engaged in more reckless behavior with Israel that only encouraged Israel's expansionism without doing anything to actually address the Palestinian problem. For instance, Donald Trump agreed to moving and recognizing the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem that instigated everybody in the region, including the Palestinians, which is why you saw the whole border riots, the Great March of Return that erupted over the year protesting that. And then Donald Trump, along with Kushner, tried to help Israelis negotiate multilateral peace agreements or more bilateral bilateral peace agreements through the Abraham Accords, again, while cutting out the Palestinians. All of this just continued to drive the Palestinian plight further and further because they saw more and more allies being isolated from them. They saw no recognition out from the United States. And then obviously, terrorist attacks is all you can do from that point, apparently. So
Trump moved an embassy, got Muslim majority countries for the first time ever to recognize the rightful existence of the Jewish state of Israel. And that justifies the heinous attack we saw on October 7th, where we killed over 1,000.
Who said anything justified
Well, you
anything?
said that Trump was responsible for October 7th.
I said that Donald Trump and his foreign policy posturing is what moved us in that direction.
President Biden was in office for 3 years before October 7th happened. How possibly could that be Trump's fault?
What did Biden do to contribute to the conditions that made October 7th happen?
Very clear, very clear. Iran was only exporting 150,000 barrels of oil a day under Trump. Now they're exporting 1.6 million. They're making hundreds of billions of dollars a year more. That emboldens them to give their proxies weapons, money, and the vigor to attack the Jewish state. And that is unacceptable in the international community. Let me tell you something about President Trump.
You think
no,
that
let me tell you
Hamas,
something about
the only
President
reason
Trump.
that Hamas
Let me tell
attacked
you
Israel, you think
about-
the only reason they'll be able to do it is because of increased Iranian funding?
Who funds Hamas?
In part, it's Iran, but Hamas gets funding from all sorts of different adventures.
Who funds Iran?
They
Hamas?
get money from Qatar, right?
Who funds? Okay. Who funds
Right?
Hamas? Of course they do.
Right? Probably
Who gives
more money.
more money?
I think,
No.
It might have been Qatar, I think,
Steven.
actually.
Well, they give them a Ritz-Carlton hotel room. But listen,
No, they were transferring a whole lot of money to the Gaza Strip. That was one of the big things, one of the big scandals that Netanyahu was involved in, was allowing that money to pass through to the Gaza Strip
Steven,
under
let's
his
just do some
supervision.
quick logical reasoning here. If Iran gets more money, that's good for Hamas, right? You agree on that? Come on.
Broadly speaking,
yeah, come on. Just concede one thing, Steven. Come on.
Broadly speaking, probably, yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's more that at play here
That's
that I'm
fine.
not even sure if you're aware of. So the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, has some amount of money that's guaranteed to it, regardless of whether exporting or importing as a
And you know
country.
what?
In general, I agree with you. Sure, yeah.
And you know what? I am glad that President Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, because that man is responsible for death and destruction. The targets he made on the Jewish state were completely unacceptable. Steven,
I don't even think the targets he made on American citizens in Iraq was unacceptable. I have no love lost for Soleimani. I'm glad the dude's dead. I'm not going to sit here and defend it, but Donald Trump doesn't do anything good foreign policy-wise for Israel. He doesn't have a vision for the region. That's why he had to basically leave all of it to his son-in-law Kushner.
Why was Crimea annexed under Obama? Why was Ukraine invaded under Biden? And why did nothing happen under Trump for 4 years? It was a complete stalemate, complete stability.
Crimea was still occupied, right?
Okay, but it was annexed under who?
Hold on. It was still occupied, right?
Of course, but
Okay.
let's be
Wait.
realistic.
There was
Let's
a
be
civil
realist,
there was a
Steven.
civil war that was raging in the Donbass the entire
Did
time,
it
right?
accelerate? Did it accelerate? Was there new land
Yes,
claims?
there was more, not new land claims, but the civil
was-
war in
was
the
Kyiv
Donbass.
being bombed? Was
No,
Kyiv being
but the
bombed?
civil war in the Donbass was still going on. What did Donald Trump do about that?
The world is safer
Nothing.
under President Trump.
It
The world was
absolutely
safer
is
under
not.
President Trump. The world knows that, Steven, and the world's going to show that on November 5th.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Actually, you know what? This one, right over here. I chose you because you'll break my heart the most, because you sound somewhat reasonable, intelligent, but you just say the craziest things, and yeah, so now I'm just going to try to figure out for 10 minutes if you really believe it or if you're hardcore just carrying water for some political side.
So, Steven, my claim is that President Biden should pardon President Trump. No matter who wins the election, President Biden ran on unity. When he came and gave that inauguration speech on January 20th, 2021, he wanted to unify the country. The best way for President Biden to leave office is to pardon President Trump and to try to bring the country together. I think as a MAGA movement, 75 million people may look at Biden and say, look, we have our political disagreements with this guy. But the fact that he pardoned Trump, much like Gerald Ford did, much like there's examples in our country of folks reaching across the aisle and doing, at that point, I think you could probably argue that Trump has the authority to pardon himself. Largely, these cases will drop if he doesn't win the election. But I think it would be a very powerful signal for the unity of the country for President Biden to pardon him.
I think there are at least 3 really good reasons why that should absolutely never happen.
Okay.
So the first one is Donald Trump doesn't need to be pardoned because the Supreme Court's already said that the president can enjoy full and absolute criminal immunity when he's doing his job. So if he's already gotten that carve out from the Supreme Court, well, why should he need any more help to be pardoned for any other types of crimes, unless we're saying that he did crimes that weren't even part of the job of being the president? I would say that's the first one. Do you want to do the other two? Or do you
Yes,
want to
go ahead,
Okay.
yeah.
The other two, the second one is I think that Donald Trump has done abhorrent things in the abusive office that I think he absolutely should be accountable for. I think that he should answer for these things. I think it's destructive to lead this idea that you can act above the law and get away with it. And I think for the third point, the idea that Democrats have to be the ones that continue to come to the table and be like, okay, we're going to do this, or okay, we're going to try to heal, and okay, we're going to do unity. When you've got Biden up here, saying like, I'm going to be a president for everybody, I'm going to do unity, and then Donald Trump is saying things like immigrants are the poison to the lifeblood of this nation, like crazy stuff like this. Like the back and forth of conservatives being unhinged and Democrats having to like apologize for behavior. I don't like the double standard anymore. I don't think you can exist inside of it.
Okay, let's talk about President Biden and the unity claim. You do agree that he ran on the platform of unity, and
Absolutely.
that was the theme of his inauguration.
Yes.
We can both agree
Yep.
on that, right, Stephen?
Yep.
When he called MAGA Republicans a threat to democracy, was that a sign of unity?
That speech absolutely is. And
Really?
Yes.
Why
And if
so?
you read the whole speech, he says over and over again, in a totally pointless manner, and I'm aware, because I'm part of the TikTok culture as well, he said over and over again, not even most Republicans are MAGA Republicans. When he said MAGA Republicans, he was talking about the subsection of people that deny the results of the last election, that don't even believe in things like institutions or peaceful transfers of power or the country operating as like a cohesive unit. He spells out over and over again that he's not talking about all conservatives, but people just clip that one line and then the picture with the red behind him and say, oh my God, look at what he was saying.
As a matter of fact, though, 72% of Republicans believe that there were serious issues in the 2020 election, just as a matter of
but
empirical
why do they
fact.
believe that?
Well, but just as a matter of empirical fact. So you've got 70% of 75 million people believe that. You are still making a very wide and sweeping statement about working class Americans, black, white, Hispanic Americans, saying that they're a threat to democracy.
I don't know if all of them necessarily don't believe like hardcore that there was like voter rigging as opposed to the media was biased or something, because Trump kind of used to dance around those claims.
Sure.
But for as much as people believe that there were issues with the election, it's because Donald Trump told them. That's it. Like, and a lot of the lies that started out in the Trump camp, we know now were completely and wholly fabricated. Everything having to do with that State Farm video was a total lie from the very beginning. Everything having to do with Dominion voting machines was a total lie from the very beginning. There are so many of these claims that when you look at the genesis of them, they were either fabricated or were maliciously constructed.
But doesn't President Biden have an obligation to be a president for all Americans, even those who vehemently disagree with him?
When you say vehemently disagree, yes. But for people that don't believe in the results of the election, this is the issue, is that conservatives have pushed the boundaries of what you can tolerate in a society that can function together, right? If a conservative wants to come out and say, I think that we need small government and I don't believe in the government providing all this relief and all this or whatever, and I think we should have small government or whatever, okay, I disagree with that, that's fine, whatever. We can still exist together and we can argue, okay? But when people are saying, I'm not, there was a phone call into a radio show where the guy's talking about his father-in-law is turning away FEMA because he thinks that FEMA is going to steal his house. We are breaking down institutions to a point to where we can't function. We need institutions as much as we might hate them. We need them to function, and conservatives spend every breath undermining them, and that is becoming dysfunctional. I don't know what you're supposed to do in that circumstance.
Well, I think what you can do is, and I'm not saying this isn't without risk, there's certainly some negative optics to it, but I would say that gesture, I'll tell you, you take away the ammunition from one side if you say, I'm going to extend the olive branch. And by the way, even if it's purely ceremonial and symbolic, even if the president can end up pardoning himself, even if President Trump wins, then the question becomes, why doesn't Biden do that as a symbol of genuine unity? Genuine unity. Stephen.
I don't think there is an olive branch that would be accepted. I don't think anybody would see it as any type of. I think that arguably, I've seen back and forth on this, that Merrick Garland probably dragged his feet on prosecuting Trump and in appointing Jack Smith and in all the charges that were filed. And that was a massive mistake, that he shouldn't have waited on that should have been something he moved much quicker on. But because of this obsession with liberals and the media to appear unbiased and to be nice to both sides and to treat both sides equally, even when, in my opinion, obviously one side is acting far more recklessly, it's destroying the country. We talked about Israel-Palestine earlier. We can talk about like children in the store. When somebody is acting inappropriately or they're acting out of line or they're behaving in a way that is unsustainable, that behavior has to be brought in line somehow. You cannot run a ship when half the people are trying to row in the other direction. And right now, conservatives are undermining every single facet of this country. And I don't know how we're supposed to function in that environment, right? Where we say like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and pardon Trump. What if we pardon Trump and then he just commits more crimes? Or what if we pardon Trump and then the next Republican president goes, well, I can probably get away with it because they're going to cuck out for unity in the end, so it'll be great, right? What do you do at that point?
I disagree with you on conservatives threatening the country. I would even say that Democrats don't threaten the country. I think most Americans want a secure border, an economy that works for everybody, good education. To your point about, quibbles over tax policy and regulation, do you believe that a supporter of the deportation of illegal migrants falls into that category of a radical conservative?
I think that's a radical position, but I don't think that's like a beyond the pale position.
Okay.
I think it's done for a variety of reasons, but no, I don't think it's beyond the pale.
Right. And I mean, look, Axios Ipsos found this in April that 55% of Americans, not just conservatives, Americans support the mass deportation of illegal migrants. 46% of Democrats do. Why do you think that is when you look at places like Chicago and New York? Why longtime
I think it can be for a
Democrats?
variety of reasons, but again, this isn't an issue. It's like the minimum wage. I think that we probably need a minimum wage, but I don't think that agreeing or disagreeing on this makes you un-American. Same thing with like abortion,
Right.
even, which is way more charged. I don't think it makes you un-American. Things like immunity for crimes for the president, that's a deeply un-American value, that the president can't be charged with criminal behavior, even in the role of his job. That, in my opinion, that's deeply un-American. The undermining of all the institutions, that America should have no role as like a world leader, that the way that we look at immigrants as enemies, or that we don't want to trade with anybody because you just want to, that these things are not, I wouldn't say the trade thing. I would say that like the immunity thing are a really big one. The idea of America needing to recede from the world is a big one. The idea of like the weaponizing of all of the DOJ that Trump wants to do, these are things that deeply concern me. Talking about terminating the Constitution and all of these things, yeah.
So we can have our disagreements. There's a lot there we could pick up. We've only got
Sure.
a couple minutes
Pick
left.
one, yeah, you're good. Or do
But you are an American. I'm an American. I believe that you love this country. I believe that you want the best for this country, the best for your family. Donald Trump wins on November 5th. Genuinely, what is one piece of advice you give him?
If Donald Trump wins, what is one piece of advice that you give him? Donald Trump, after he's gone, will have family members that remain in this world that carry his name through the world. He will have a legacy, he'll have a reputation, and that the way that he acts in his last 4 years as president will be remembered for the rest of history, for as long as America continues to exist, and that he has an opportunity in his second term at least to right some of the wrongs of the first term, or to prove people like me wrong at least when I said that the United States would become an authoritarian hellhole or whatever else. That he has an opportunity to prove people like me wrong, and I hope that he would take advantage of that.
I think that'd be great. I think that would be great for the country, to tell you the truth. Is there one policy, one position that you agree with Donald Trump on? Even remotely?
The problem is I just don't like his thought process. So there are going to be things that we agree on, but like we're going to agree on them for totally different
What's an
reasons.
example
I
of
think.
that?
Like in general, I'm not as big on like DEI or affirmative action type stuff. I think for a variety of reasons has a lot of different issues. I think that having a secure border is really important. Arguably one of the most important things about having a country is having a border. I think the Democrats like broadly agree with that as well. I think that yeah, I could probably find other things, but like our agreements are going to be very roundabout. We're not getting here the same way. But I think the
Sure.
creation of the Space Force was good. I obviously all the conservatives hate it, but I thought Warp Speed was a tremendous achievement of capitalism, of pharmaceuticals, of the United States and U.S. leadership. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think the big picture though, and can we give him a round of applause?
No,
for
I don't
being
want a
here?
round of applause. Oh my God.
I'm a big believer, Stephen, that when we come together as a country and have conversations, difficult conversations like this, we may not walk away saying, well, I agree with Stephen, or I agree with James, or I agree with any of the folks here, but you walk away saying, that's a person, that's an American, we can disagree agreeably, and I might understand for just a moment their perspectives. I want to thank you for being here. I think that the biggest thing for the country going forward, in a sense, is how do we have more debate, not less, more disagreement, not less? Let's not just make debate great again, let's build it back better.
Okay.
Thanks, man.